Welcome to the Success Partner Podcast. I'm Daya Naef, your host and founder of The Success Partner. On this show, we dive into the stories of attorneys, business professionals, and entrepreneurs who have navigated the ups and downs of building successful careers and businesses. From the strategies they've implemented to the challenges they've overcome, we're here to uncover the insights that can help you on your own journey to success. So sit back, relax, and let's get started. Welcome back, everybody, to the Success Partner Podcast. I am your host, Daya Naef, and I'm super excited to have Elise Holtzman on the call today. She, like myself, also works with lawyers and law firms and has come from a big law background, which very much differs from my background, but has that wealth of depth of experience. And we're gonna pick up some trends today of what's going on in the legal world, both law firms and individual lawyers out there, based on Elise's background and her extensive work. She just came back from the Managing Partners Forum, which is super excited to get the information from that. So Elise, just tell us about yourself, and we'll jump in on those current topics.
Absolutely. So Daya, thank you so much for having me on your show. I'm delighted to be here. You know, you and I are big nerds about this stuff. We love our lawyers and we love the topic. So I'm excited to be here today. I practice law like you. As you mentioned, I came out of big law. And then at some point, about 17, 18 years ago, I shifted gears and decided to become an executive and leadership coach. So just over 16 years ago, I founded the Lawyer's Edge, where we work exclusively with lawyers and law firms to help them grow thriving practices. And we do that in a couple of different ways. Again, I spend all my time with lawyers. So I do things like individual coaching with everything from senior associates to senior leaders. We also have a couple coaches on our team who work with more junior folks. And we also do a lot of training programs, so workshops, webinars, and seminars. And we basically do all of this stuff in two areas, primarily business development. How do we get people to understand how to do this and not be afraid of it? Because we know that law firms are for-profit businesses. How do we get law firms foster cultures of business development in the firm so they don't just assume that, look at somebody and say, well, either he or she can or can't develop business and, they're a lost cause or they're a natural, so we're going to throw all the resources at them, that kind of thing. And then also leader development. How do we make sure that there's succession planning in law firms and that that law firm is going to survive into the next generation? Because we know that a lot of small to mid-sized firms don't survive into the second generation. They thrive on the personality and the stamina and the charisma of the founders, but then they start to fall apart when the founders start retiring or leaving to do something else. So that's kind of what I do. I absolutely love it. And as you mentioned, I go out to a lot of different law firms and do programs, and I do things for bar associations, but I'm also on the faculty of something called the Managing Partner Forum, which some of your listeners may be aware of. It was started by John Remsen. It's been around for more than 20 years, and they just had their big conference in Atlanta where they gather together more than 100 managing partners of small to mid-sized law firms, anywhere from 5 lawyers to biggest firm in the room probably had 180 lawyers, but it's mostly south of 120, let's say. And they talk about all of the different issues that are coming up for managing partners, and what the partners love about it. And there's some COOs in there as well, is that they get to talk to their peers. And there's it's confidentiality. What happens in the conference room stays in the conference room. And so people are really able to talk about what's going on for them. And as a result, because I'm on the faculty and because I spent hours and hours facilitating these conversations among managing partners, I got a front row seat to what the hottest topics are for lawyers and law firms in terms of growth and at just the well-being of law firms and lawyers.
Awesome. I cannot wait to hear some of your insights.
Yeah, so I can go ahead and share a couple of those with you. And I think what I heard was relevant both to law firm leaders and lawyers who are simply practicing in these firms. John Remsen, who I mentioned, does a lot of live polling in the room, and he publishes that data to the people who attend his programs. And I also do want to give a shout out. So John and I are partnering together for the third year coming up in the fall to do a program in Chicago called Empowering Women in Law Firm Leadership. And that program is largely for women managing partners in law firms and emerging leaders who are women in small to mid-sized law firms. So we've had two phenomenal programs the last 2 years, and we were just texting this morning. We're now that the larger Atlanta conference is behind us, we are ready to plan for the fall. And so in doing all of that polling, we learned a few things about what is top of mind for managing partners and some of the opportunities and challenges that they're dealing with. So for starters, the kinds of things that they wanted to talk about were really around profitability, right? How do we grow profitability given the fact that so many law firms are under pricing pressure from larger law firms? How do we engage in appropriate succession planning? In other words, how do we get the older generation to actually leave and retire and turn over the reins of the law firm to the people coming up behind them, turn over clients and relationships to the people coming behind them? And there was a lot of conversation as well about generational differences. And of course, AI. I mean, I'm throwing AI in at the end. I know that you're much more of an expert on that than I am. There's a lot of conversation about the impact that AI is already having and is going to have. I think that some of the smaller firms are a little slower to adopt. I mean, we know, and we say this with love because we're lawyers too, and we know that law firms are not the first people on the block to adopt new technologies. I always say they're kind of like my parents were the last people on the block to get a microwave oven back in the day, and I'm dating myself. But a lot about profitability and succession planning had to do with generational differences. And I think that that's something that a lot of people are complaining about in the workplace, but not necessarily addressing.
I see that. I definitely see that a lot. They're like, we see this, but like, what are we supposed to do about it? And then just go on with their day. It's like,
Right.
yeah.
Or just whine about it. And listen, we all, whining is not bad. I mean, we have to get it off our chest, but when you hear too much of it, you start thinking, okay, let's start dealing with it. And so, when it comes to succession planning, what I hear from the younger lawyers, and not necessarily young, by the way, just younger, is that the old guard doesn't want to retire, right? They're not leaving. And there's been a lot written and said about this. I think that a lot of it has to do with the fact that boomers and older Gen X, particularly men, because it's largely men, as we know, their identities, their self-worth, their sense of who they are is so wrapped up in the work that they do because that's what they've devoted themselves to their whole life that it's hard for them to move on, right? We know people who are going to, die at their desks, or they never want to retire, or, they don't know what they would do all day with themselves if they weren't working. And so I think that we have to respect that. And at the same time, help them see that there are options for them, or find other ways to get them really involved in the firm. So sometimes for some people, there's a reluctance to turn the clients over. There's a reluctance to give up the title of managing partner or management committee member. So there's a lot of talk about that. How do we make that happen? And I think that if you're a more senior attorney, I hope you're listening and think about ways for you to make sure that the firm continues. And if you're younger, let's not get annoyed with the senior partners. Let's figure out, understand them and respect them for the contributions that they've made and can continue to make. Maybe they can mentor other people. Maybe they can help with business development in terms of teaching people how to collaborate more effectively and cross-sell more effectively, teaching them how to develop business, because so many of them don't know how to do it. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. Again, if you can kind of get past the hand wringing, which is understandable. I always say it's understandable. It's just not desirable. Right. And then, when it comes to profitability, a lot of firms are talking about how they are getting crushed by some of the bigger firms, because the bigger firms will come to their associates or junior partners and say, hey, we're going to, in a small market, we'll pay you another $60,000. Well, in a small market where the price of living is pretty decent compared to some of the cities, $60,000, I think, is a lot of money to anybody, let alone if you're in a situation where the cost of living is a little more reasonable than in some of the large cities. So, that's coming up. And then it becomes a question of, well, how do we retain our top talent so that they don't go somewhere else? Because we're training them and we're bringing them on and we want to be loyal to them, but they're leaving. And so there was a lot of discussion about that. And how can you create the kind of culture in your firm where people actually want to stay?
Yeah, it's what it comes down to. You can't throw any more money at them. You don't have it, but you can definitely bring them into they feel like they're part of the family, they're part of the mission, and they wouldn't want to go anywhere else just for the money.
Yeah, I think a lot of that is also about developing them, right? Because one of the things that I've heard in the last few years is that, and I've heard this from some exit interviews for law firms where they've done exit interviews and people are out the door. They tried to survey them before they leave and decide to leave. But it's a lot about developing them because what people forget or perhaps don't know about the younger generations, and when you think about it, it makes sense, is that these generations, the younger millennials and the older Gen Z, they were raised to be part of the conversation. They were asked, what do you think about such and such? And where do you want to go for dinner? And what do you want? What, activities do you want to do? And hey, let's get you a baseball coach. And hey, do you want to be on the dance team? And we'll get you, we'll get you a tutor for AP biology. I mean, they're part of the conversation and we educated the heck out of them. They were always being enriched. And then they get to the law firm and they're still in a top down environment. And so I think they're kind of baffled and they want to be part of the conversation. They're constantly asking about transparency, which makes older attorneys crazy, right? Like, I'm not going to open my books to you and show you every detail. And I'm not sure, I don't think that's what they mean by transparency. They just want to know, what does it take to do well here? What does it take to make partner? How is my compensation going to change? They want to be part of conversations with clients. So I think understanding the generations and understanding how we can support them in their goals is going to make the talent retention piece a lot easier and the succession planning piece a lot easier. Right. So, those are some of the things that I was hearing. And I think that they have tremendous implications for both the senior people and the junior people. If you're senior, and I say that I am senior, I'm very senior. We're not going to talk about how old I am, but I'm very senior. And so, I say this with love and respect, like, let's not be sticks in the mud. Let's not just complain about the younger generation. I mean, the complaints about generational differences have been going on since cave mom and cave dad complained about cave kid and vice versa, right? That's not going to change. But there's a bigger divide right now, I think partly because of COVID. So I think that let's start understanding generational differences, listen to podcasts about it, read books about it. There are reasons that people who are a different age from you are showing up the way they are and a reason you show up the way you do. And I think the same could be said for the younger generation. Instead of complaining about those old fogies or whatever you call them, there are other words for it, learn more about it. And I've noticed this when I do some training on generational differences, that everybody jokes about it in the beginning and they can tell you what's wrong with boomers and they can tell you what people say about them. And then when we start talking about where it all comes from and the life experiences that people have, the room gets very quiet. And I've had people come up to me and say, I didn't know that boomers and Gen X thought that way for those reasons. It makes so much sense now. And so I think that the education there is really important. And I think that it cuts across a lot of the issues that law firms are having these days.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like the idea of how this is going to go, and then the knowledge transfer and the information transfer,
Yeah.
and that's another thing that gets really broken down when someone just waits until they're too sick to come to work, or their spouse is too sick to come to, and they have to all of a sudden do this, and they haven't actually sat down with the juniors or the risings partners and said, hey, you know what, this is how this has been running. This is what's in my head. This is what's in my head. This is what's automatic for me. And I want to tell you so that you can come up and step in my shoes when inevitably it's going to happen at somehow, some way.
Yeah. I mean, that's a huge piece of it is the information transfer and then the relationships, right? If the senior partner doesn't involve the junior partner or the senior associate in getting to know the client and serving the client because they want to hold on to the clients, in the way that the people senior to them always did. They want to operate in silos. It's mine, mine, mine. I want to keep my origination, not even selfishly. Maybe, there's some fear-based stuff around it or ego stuff around it. Those relationships cannot be reproduced overnight. So, then the client gets lost. And I've heard this story many, many times. We had a great client for many, many, many years. We just sort of thought of them as an institutional client, but the partner wasn't willing to involve anyone young in it. And then their older people retire, right? So it's not just our partner retiring, but their older folks at the client are retiring. And we don't know, the junior people at our place don't know the junior people at their place. So there are all kinds of things that can be transferred, institutional knowledge, client relationships, even mindset about the firm and excitement about what the firm could be can all be transferred. So there's just so much opportunity there. And a lot of it is just, we've got to talk to each other and acknowledge each other's differences and be okay with them.
It's definitely, and I do hope people that are listening are taking this into consideration. And the time, we don't want to pull away from time from the actual work, but we have to. It's a long-term investment to take these breaks and takes these moments and say, hey, what does our leadership track look like? And in small firms, like that's what people want. They say, hey, I want to know what it is. It doesn't have to be the nuts and bolts of your book of business, but what is my place in this firm? Where is my growth opportunity? And if it's completely silent or a void, then when someone comes knocking, they're out the door.
Right. And that's what they, in a large part, Daya, that's what they mean by transparency. Just
Mhm.
where's this thing going? Right. Even if you don't give them every last detail, even if you can't promise them anything, you could say, hey, this is what we suspect is going to happen. This is kind of what we think needs for you to happen in order for you to be here long term and perhaps become partner. One other thing I just want to throw out there is one of the pushbacks that I'm getting from senior leaders in law firms is that they're telling me that, and I am seeing it, that a lot of the junior partners or senior associates don't want to become rainmakers. They don't want to take on leadership roles. And so what are we supposed to do when we see that? We have people now who they want the work-life balance. They want to work to live rather than live to work. And what do we do with that? And so the thing is that they see it as laziness. And are there people who are lazy? Sure. There are people in every generation who are lazy. It's understandable that they might look at it as laziness. But if you talk to those generations, they aren't even sure, with all the things that younger generations are worried about, like climate change and global instability and economic instability, they're not even sure this stuff's going to be around in 20 years. And they don't necessarily want to put off, I've had young people say to me, well, your generation works until you're, 65 or 70, and then you hope to have a few years of living your life after that. We don't want to do that, right? Because they saw their parents do it. So again, it's understandable. What I say about that is to, over time, let people see the reasons why doing these things can be so fantastic. And are all of them going to step up to the plate and want to do that? Absolutely not. But then you're going to see who is into doing it. You're going to hire for that. You're going to promote for that, and you can invest in those people and say, you know what, we would like to send you to a leadership program because we see you as the future of the firm. We would like to get you, and obviously I'm preaching to the choir here. We would like to get you a coach or something like that so you can become the best of who you're meant to be, because we believe in you and we see you as the future of the firm. So not everyone's going to step up, but it's also not fair to say that everyone is lazy and just wants to make a lot of money. Like it's none of it's 100% true, even if it has a few kernels of truth to it.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought this up. I've been on a couple of calls, different workshops that I was invited to speak out or be on a panel with, and this is definitely one of the things: the rise of alternative roles in the firm, as opposed to, hey, you know what, you're just on this partnership track. It goes 7 to 7 years, and blah 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 blah. And it's like, no, people want to be counsel. They want to stay counsel. They want to take over the technology department. They want to be maybe a practice manager. They don't want to necessarily just go up and take on those egregious responsibilities and non-billables and all the business development requirements of the traditional equity partner model.
So a great example came up last week for me about what you're talking about. In one of my groups that I was facilitating, which was for law firm leaders of about 50 to up to 180, there was a guy in the room, and it was all managing partners and COOs, and he was talking very, very authoritatively, confidently. He was fantastic. And at some point he mentioned, we were having this conversation, and he said something about being managing associate at the firm. And when I tell you, everyone looked at him, there was like this long pause in the conversation where people were trying to figure out, what on earth are you talking about? Well, it turns out that his firm, was fairly small, was growing rapidly, had these leaders that had started the firm that had some great ideas. And this guy had some great ideas. And he is literally has a role of the managing associate. And he came to this program representing the partnership of the program. And he knows everything there is to know. I don't know every detail that he knows about their books, but he knows about their growth plans. He knows about their challenges. He helps them figure out, hiring and firing and all of that sort of thing. And imagine what this guy is going to be like when he makes partner. Imagine what he's going to understand about how to grow this firm and keep it thriving. And so I was utterly fascinated. And in fact, I'm going to ask him to be a guest on my podcast because I've got to hear more about this. So there are so many opportunities. One of the things that you and I know that law firm leaders say all the time is, but we've always done it this way. Right. So first of all, that's the kiss of death.
Yes.
And then the second thing is, what are our peer institutions doing? Well, that might sound like a good idea, but what is everybody else doing? As if they're not all already doing it, we can't do it either. And what I encourage people to do is not to take that tack. This firm said, hey, we see this young guy. He is full of ideas. He's a hard worker. He's smart and he wants it. Let's give him some leadership growth here in this firm, give him some authority over certain things in this firm. And they are going to most likely have somebody who will stay with them for the duration because they are growing him and investing in him and teaching in him and making him part of the fabric of the firm.
That's great. I can't wait to listen to that episode and maybe talk to him myself. I love that type of alternative, embracing it and saying, hey, it's not the way we've always done it. The law industry is always a lagging industry. Like even now with AI, financial and medical are like, they've been doing it for a long time. They've got the policies, they're using it, they're showing the returns on it. And still we have the legal industry kind of just creeping along and tiptoeing.
Yeah, and I'll do a shout out to you and folks that you work with on that issue, because one of the things that we learned in the live polling in the room, again with about 100 and I don't know 115 or so managing partners, was that they're sort of thinking about AI. Some of them say you're not allowed to use AI. Don't bring AI into the office. You can't access AI. Some of them are more open minded and they're starting to think about it. But exactly 0%, 0% of 105, 115 managing partners had AI policies for their firm. And so the joke became, go home, turn on ChatGPT, Claude, whatever it is that whatever it is that is out there for you, and ask them to give you a policy. And I don't even care what it says at this point. You've got to have something and then figure out, because people are using it. There's some research that says that a lot of young people are bringing their own AI tools to the office and they're using them, just not on your system. So if you don't get some control over this at a bare minimum, and I mean, we're all lawyers, who doesn't love a good policy, right? So let's get ourselves an AI policy and then start figuring out what it can do for us, because it's here. It's not even like, well, maybe we'll wait and see if it's going to be a thing. It's here. And so we've got to get some control over how we're using it.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, I really appreciate you coming on today and giving us the update. How do people get in touch with you to learn more about you and your programs?
Well, thanks for asking. So please feel free to visit us at our website, which is just thelawyersedge.com. So it's thelawyersedge.com. And then I love connecting with people on LinkedIn. So you can find me there under my name, Elise Holtzman. I've got, a newsletter here and there. I've got some resources on the website. We're putting together some other resources for the website. So, would love to connect with people.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. Again, this has been an episode of the Success Partner Podcast. And today we had Elise Holtzman, and I am your host, Daya Naef. Please like, subscribe, and stay tuned.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us on the Success Partner Podcast. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation and found some valuable takeaways to apply to your own business journey. Remember, this show is brought to you by The Success Partner, where we help small law firms and business owners achieve unparalleled success through strategic guidance, operational excellence, and effective marketing. If you're ready to take your business to the next level, visit thesuccesspartner.net to learn more. Until next time, keep striving for success, and I will see you in the next episode.